Welcome to Daily English Stories. Every story hides a world. Some inspire, some haunt, some stay forever. Chapter 1. The Boy with Big Dreams. In a small town called Braunau am Inn on the border of Austria and Germany, a baby boy was born on a cold April night in 1889. His name was Adolf Hitler. No one could have imagined that this tiny child, wrapped in a blanket and sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms, would one day shake the world. His father, Alois Hitler, was a strict and proud man, a government officer who believed in discipline above everything else. His mother, Clara, was gentle, kind, and deeply loving. She was the only warmth in young Adolf's life, the only person who truly understood him. When she smiled, the world around him felt safe. Adolf was a quiet boy, often lost in his imagination. While other children played outside, he spent hours sketching buildings, people, and landscapes. He wanted to become an artist, to paint, to draw, to create beauty. But his father had other plans. Alois wanted his son to join the civil service, to live a secure and respectable life. Every dinner turned into an argument. Every dream was met with anger. "Art is not a career," his father shouted. "You will be a government officer just like me." But Adolf's heart belonged to colors, canvases, and shapes that came alive in his mind. When his father died suddenly in 1903, Adolf was only 14. The house became quieter, but also colder. Without his father's shadow, he felt free, yet lost. His mother's health began to weaken, and Adolf grew closer to her, spending days at her bedside. When she passed away in 1907, his world fell apart. He was just 18, alone, heartbroken, and without direction. Holding her photograph in his hand, he made a promise to himself to make her proud, to become something, someone the world would remember. With a few coins in his pocket, he left for Vienna, the great city of dreams. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts, carrying his best sketches in a folder that held all his hopes. But when the letter came, it was not what he expected. He had been rejected. The words on that paper crushed him. He read them again and again, refusing to believe. The Academy said he lacked talent, that his drawings were not good enough. He tried again the next year, and once more they refused him. Vienna was beautiful, but cruel. The city lights glowed for others, not for him. He wandered through cold streets, sleeping in shelters, eating little, and drawing for coins. Days turned into months, months into years. He watched people of every race and religion walking freely, while he, the boy with big dreams, had nothing. In these long nights, bitterness began to grow inside him, silent and dark. He blamed the world, he blamed fate, and soon he began to blame people. His disappointment turned into anger. The dreamer was fading, and something else was being born. A new fire, dangerous and consuming. By the time he left Vienna, the boy who once wanted to paint beautiful landscapes had already begun to see the world in black and white. He didn't know it yet, but his brush would soon be replaced by a sword, and his art by destruction. Chapter 2. The Soldier of the Great War. The streets of Vienna could no longer hold him. Poverty, hunger, and rejection had turned the once dreaming artist into a restless wanderer. In 1913, Adolf moved to Munich, Germany, a country he admired deeply, a place he felt truly belonged to him. But soon, the sound of marching boots echoed across Europe. The world was changing. In the summer of 1914, the news spread like wildfire. Archduke Franz Ferdinand had been assassinated. Within weeks, nations declared war, and the world plunged into chaos. To many, it was fear and uncertainty, but to Adolf, it was purpose. He enlisted in the German army, eager to fight for a cause greater than himself. For the first time, he felt accepted, a part of something powerful. The uniform fit him like destiny, and when he marched through the streets with his fellow soldiers, he felt pride burning in his chest. War became his new world. He carried messages across battlefields filled with smoke and screams. He witnessed men fall beside him, the ground soaked in blood and rain, yet he never turned away. He faced danger head-on, earning medals for bravery and loyalty. For the first time since childhood, Adolf found a reason to live. He had no family, no home, no art, only the war. Amid the thunder of cannons and the cries of dying men, he discovered his identity. But the war that gave him purpose would soon take it away. After 4 long years, the unthinkable happened. Germany lost. In November 1918, while Adolf lay wounded in a hospital bed, the news reached him like a blade through the heart. His beloved Germany had surrendered. He refused to believe it. How could a nation so strong, so brave, be defeated? He wept in silence as he read that the Kaiser had fled, and a new government had signed the Treaty of Versailles, a document that humiliated Germany, stripped it of its pride, its power, and its dignity. The streets filled with anger. Soldiers returned home not as heroes, but as beggars. Food was scarce, jobs were gone, and hope vanished like smoke. The once proud land was broken. Adolf walked among the ruins of Munich, wearing his old army coat, still clutching his medals, symbols of a victory that never came. Inside him, something began to harden. He felt betrayed, not just by politicians, but by the world itself. He believed Germany had been stabbed in the back, that traitors within had destroyed what millions had fought for. The fire of anger that began in Vienna now blazed like a storm. The artist had died long ago. The soldier was all that remained. As he looked at the tattered German flag fluttering weakly in the cold wind, he made another promise, one far darker than before. "I will restore Germany," he whispered. "I will make the world remember our name." What he didn't know was that this vow, born from pain, pride, and rage, would soon lead not only to his own downfall, but to one of the darkest chapters in human history. Chapter 3: The Rise of a Leader. The war had ended, but for Adolf, peace was a battlefield of another kind. Germany lay shattered, its cities in ruins, its people starving, its spirit crushed beneath the weight of defeat. The proud empire he once fought for had been reduced to a land of humiliation and hunger. In the smoky beer halls of Munich, men gathered to shout, argue, and dream of revival. Among them, Adolf listened. He watched faces light up with anger, then dim again with despair. And then, one evening, when it was his turn to speak, the room fell silent. His voice carried more than words. It carried pain, passion, and fury, a reflection of every broken heart in Germany. He spoke of betrayal, of pride, of a nation that had been stabbed in the back. He promised strength, unity, and rebirth. People listened, and then they began to follow. That night, something began, a movement that would soon shake the world. In 1919, Adolf joined a small political group known as the German Workers' Party. Within a year, he transformed it. He renamed it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. He gave it a new symbol, the swastika, red for struggle, white for purity, black for power. He gave desperate people something to believe in. His speeches became firestorms. In every word, he painted a picture of a powerful Germany, proud, pure, unbroken. He told the poor they were not defeated, just betrayed. He told the angry they were not alone. And the crowd roared with every word. To them, he wasn't just a man, he was a promise. By the early 1930s, the world was once again in crisis. The Great Depression had crushed economies, and Germany's suffering deepened. But while others saw chaos, Adolf saw opportunity. He used fear as fuel, turning despair into devotion. He blamed the weak, the outsiders, and those he called enemies of the nation. His words divided, but they also united. Under him, in 1933, the unthinkable happened. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. The boy who once dreamed of painting cathedrals now ruled a nation. The streets that once ignored him now echoed with the march of boots, the flutter of red flags, and the chants of millions. He built roads, revived industries, and gave jobs to the jobless. To many, he looked like a savior. Germany stood tall again, disciplined, strong, unstoppable, but beneath the surface of pride and progress, a darker truth was spreading. The dream he promised was not built on hope, but on hatred. Freedom was replaced by fear. Loyalty was demanded, not earned. And yet, the crowds cheered louder than ever. In every city, his face appeared on walls, in schools, on flags. His voice echoed through radios. His presence filled the hearts of millions. The artist had failed. The soldier had fallen. But the leader, the one the world would come to fear, had finally risen. What began as a promise to rebuild Germany was turning into something else entirely. And soon, the whole world would feel the weight of his dream. Chapter 4. The empire of fear, Germany was rising again. Factories roared back to life. Soldiers marched with pride, and flags fluttered in the wind. Bold red, white, and black. The people cheered for the man who had promised to make their nation great again. For many, Adolf Hitler was no longer a politician. He was a savior. But every empire built on fear hides its cracks behind glory. Hitler's rule began with discipline and ended with domination. He rebuilt the army, defied the Treaty of Versailles, and filled the skies with planes and tanks. Every child in school learned to salute, every worker sang songs of loyalty, and every voice that dared to question simply disappeared. The walls of Germany whispered with secrets, and the streets echoed with silence. Newspapers printed only what the government allowed. Radios spoke with one voice, his voice. The people were told what to believe, whom to love, and whom to hate. Slowly, the truth was replaced by propaganda, and the hearts of millions were trained to obey. But beneath the surface of order and pride, darkness was spreading. Hitler's vision of a pure nation demanded an enemy. He found it in the Jews, blaming them for Germany's suffering, its defeat, and even its poverty. What began as words became laws, and what began as laws became terror. Jewish shops were marked, their rights were taken, their lives erased piece by piece. The world did not yet know the full horror that was coming, but in the cold shadows of concentration camps, the machinery of death was already being built. The Holocaust had begun, not in a flash of violence, but in quiet, calculated cruelty. Millions were forced from their homes. Families were torn apart. Children vanished into smoke. and still the streets of Berlin glowed with celebration. Parades, music, lights, the illusion of victory was everywhere. Germany looked unstoppable, but its greatness had been bought with the blood of innocence. Even those who saw the truth were too afraid to speak. Fear had become law. Hitler's empire was not built on love for Germany, but on hatred for the world. His dream, once of pride and power, had turned into a nightmare of destruction. As the years passed, he prepared for a war to conquer, to control, to cleanse. The man who had once been a rejected artist now painted with fire and death across the map of Europe. Behind every triumphal march, behind every shouted Heil, there was a quiet cry from those who suffered unseen. Germany stood tall, but its soul was drowning. The world watched, uncertain, unaware of the storm that was about to consume them all. The empire of fear was rising, and soon it would burn the world. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Dictator. By 1944, the world was on fire. The dream that had once promised power and pride now brought only ruin and death. Adolf Hitler's Germany, once feared and celebrated, was collapsing from within. The cities that once cheered his name now echoed with sirens, bombs, and screams. The man who had vowed to make his nation unstoppable was watching it crumble before his eyes. The war that Hitler had unleashed upon the world was turning against him. The Allies, Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union had joined forces, pushing back the German army from all directions. One by one, Hitler's generals reported the same news: defeat, retreat, surrender. But he refused to listen. In his bunker deep beneath Berlin, he surrounded himself with maps, false hopes, and trembling advisors who no longer dared to speak the truth. Above him, the city was dying. The once grand streets of Berlin were buried under dust and fire. Buildings burned, families fled, and soldiers fought hopelessly against the unstoppable Soviet advance. The sky, once filled with German planes, was now ruled by enemy bombers, raining destruction on the capital. Yet, inside the bunker, Hitler clung to his fading dream, a dream that had already turned to ashes. Eva Braun was with him, his loyal companion till the end. For years, she had lived quietly in the background of his chaotic world, the woman behind the dictator. As the war drew its final breath, she chose to remain by his side, even when escape was still possible. "If you stay, I stay," she whispered, knowing what that decision truly meant. Each day in the bunker grew shorter, darker, more desperate. Hitler gave orders that no one followed anymore. He raged at maps that no longer represented reality. His armies were gone. His allies had abandoned him, and his people, the millions who once shouted Heil Hitler, now starved in the ruins of their homes. The world outside was no longer his to control. The sound of Soviet artillery drew closer each night. Walls shook, lights flickered. Berlin was surrounded. Still, Hitler refused to surrender. "Germany will not fall," he shouted, his voice echoing through the concrete halls. But even those who served him could see the truth. The war was lost, and the man they once feared had become a ghost of his own creation. On April the 29th, 1945, deep underground, Hitler made one final decision. He married Eva Braun in a brief, quiet ceremony inside the bunker. There were no crowds, no music, no speeches, only the sound of distant explosions. Eva wore a simple blue dress. Hitler signed the papers with shaking hands. They toasted with cheap champagne and spoke softly about the life they never had, a life far from politics, from hate, from power. Outside, the Soviet troops were closing in on the city, the world that Hitler had built through fire and fear was falling apart piece by piece. The next day, April 30th, 1945, Hitler called his closest followers into the room. "I will not be captured alive," he said firmly. His voice was calm now, almost detached, as though he had already left the world behind. He shook hands with a few of his men, thanked them for their loyalty, and dismissed them with a cold nod. Then he walked into a smaller room with Eva. Moments later, a single gunshot echoed through the bunker. The man who had wanted to rule the world was gone. When the Soviet soldiers finally reached the bunker, they found only silence. The dictator who once commanded millions had taken his final breath beneath the ruins of his empire. Beside him lay Eva Braun, loyal to the very end. A week later, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. The once mighty Nazi empire was nothing more than rubble, smoke, and broken memories. The streets of Berlin were filled with exhausted soldiers, orphaned children, and shattered dreams. The world looked at the destruction and asked, how could one man cause so much pain? Adolf Hitler's story ended not with victory or glory, but with tragedy and shame. His dream of power without compassion had destroyed everything: his people, his nation, and himself. The world would spend decades rebuilding, trying to understand the darkness that had consumed so many. From the ashes of his empire, a new Germany rose, one that swore never to walk that path again. Today, his name stands as a warning that hate, when disguised as strength, can poison even the brightest of nations. That pride, without empathy, leads only to destruction, and that humanity, when forgotten, leaves nothing but ruins. Power may build empires, but only kindness can keep them standing. This was the end of Adolf Hitler, the dictator who tried to control the world but could not control himself. His fall reminds us that a true strength is not in domination, but in compassion, not in fear, but in understanding. The war ended, but its lessons live on forever.